Hello everyone, Ace here, and today I'm going to be providing my thoughts on a recent topic that has been requested by my fans, specifically the fall of Jim Sterling, which in my humble opinion has been going on for a while, despite Jim's own claims that it is a relatively recent reaction to Jim coming out as a non-binary individual. Of course, Jim claims that the loss of subscribers can be directly correlated with coming out as non-binary. However, statistics from Social Blade directly contradict this claim, showing that Jim had in fact been losing subscribers since October of 2020, with the sole exception being a small rebound in January of 2021. My point here is that Jim Sterling's channel was already actively losing subscribers even before the Death and Taxes video in which Jim came out as non-binary. However, even then, I would suggest that this is not exactly the first sign that Jim's channel is in trouble, and is merely the latest bit of evidence to demonstrate that instead. For if we go back to Social Blade and instead look at video views, you may notice that Jim's channel has actually been on a steady decline with once again brief upticks since November of 2019. I would also have to point out that further evidence of Jim's decline can even be found on the Jim Sterling channel itself when you look at the most popular videos ever made, and the genuine lack of relatively recent entries in that particular list. For example, the most popular video that Jim has made within the last year is this one, which only sits on 616,000 views, which I should remind you is for a channel that at this time has 890,000 subscribers. In fact, the last time that Jim has been able to upload a video that has managed over 1 million views was back in October of 2019, which just predates the start of the decline of the channel. In other words, it's quite safe to say that Jim Sterling's channel has been going downhill for quite a while now. But you may now be wondering why exactly that is the case. And to be honest, I believe that I can actually provide you the perfect example of the various problems with the Jim Sterling brand, all rolled up into one single relatively recent Jimquisition, namely Cyclical Gamer Discourse, which was uploaded on May the 10th. And naturally, there are several things to talk about with regards to this one particular video. For a start, there are numerous examples of Jim Sterling's doublethink on display for all to see, such as Jim raging against gamers who complain about the corruption in game journalism that is most blatantly demonstrated by the fact that we have game journalists who even lack the skills necessary to play the games that they are even covering, and then going on to rage about the corruption inherent within modern game journalism. Interestingly, you could even argue that this isn't merely a case of doublethink, but even triplethink, because Jim is ultimately criticizing the game journalist industry for ignoring accusations of harassment and covering for companies like Ubisoft, when Jim Sterling has also decided to ignore examples of harassment and cover for fellow game journalists such as Schreier, who for one example harassed fellow YouTuber Sophia Narwitz over her reporting on the fact that the people running E3 have been inadvertently doxing their own attendees for years now. So yes, while Jim Sterling wants to rage against gamers for thinking that game journalists are corrupt, Jim also believes that game journalists are also corrupt and covering for harassers, and complains about it while Jim is a shining example of how game journalists cover for harassers. But of course, this is not the only example of cognitive dissonance on display, as Jim also decides to rage against gamers TM for complaining about the forceful insertion of wokeness, and even going so far as to suggest that this wokeness isn't actually political, and then immediately going on to argue that everything is political, and in the process inadvertently display that the gamers TM actually have a point in their complaints. I could also talk about the sheer repetitive nature of this particular video, as it covers topics that Jim has talked about numerous times in the past, but credit where credit is due, that at least seems to be part of the point, although I would still argue that it is yet another example of why people are just not tuning in as often. But above all, the thing that damages the Jim Sterling brand the absolute most is the constant attacks on the audience itself. It seems quite clear at this point that Jim Sterling simply hates gamers, despite gamers supposedly being the target audience of the channel. And so it's only natural to see a decline when the target audience keeps getting smeared for literal years on end. So in my opinion, this particular Jimquisition is a perfect example of everything wrong with the Jim Sterling brand these days. Although there is one more interesting detail to bring up as well from this particular video, and that's the fact that Jim Sterling claims that the gamer discourse itself has remained relatively unchanged despite the absolute best efforts of the SJWs, which is itself an interesting claim given that the whole point of the SJWs was to try to make changes, and to suggest that nothing has changed is ultimately an admission that the woke community are losing, and that even they know that they are losing. So needless to say, for anyone who is curious as to why Jim Sterling is not doing so well anymore, I would have to point them to this one specific video as a perfect storm of an example. But in any case, this has been Ace. Hope to see you guys again soon. Take care. Ace out.